Right now, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the promises the president made in when he addressed the House and the Senate the other day. Some of it was kind of pie in the sky stuff that we haven't done before, and it's got to be paid for somehow. Justin Bogie is our guest right now. He's a senior policy analyst in fiscal affairs with the Heritage Foundation. Justin, how are you?
Doing well, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. What were you thinking? Did you have a calculator? You were adding things up as you went through the president's speech?
Well, a little bit. As you know, here at the Heritage Foundation, we're very interested in the national debt and the deficit level. So it was good to hear that he has some offsets planned for his defense spending plan. Would love to hear some options on how we're going to offset spending for things like infrastructure and potentially this Obamacare replacement and building the wall and those kind of things. So while some of it was encouraging, I think there's still a lot out there that we don't know and need to hear more about.
Yeah, what's the biggest question in your mind?
Just how are we going to pay for it? He's promised during the campaign that he would like to put debt on a downward trajectory. But at the same time, we have a lot of new kind of spending initiatives. You're talking about a major infrastructure investment. And that's got to be paid for somehow. And I don't know if, we're going to grow the economy by 3.5% or 4% or something like that is really realistic, or if that's really a way to pay for it. So we'd like to see some more concrete cuts and take a look at entitlement reform and that kind of thing. Really, so we just have a more concrete idea of how we're going to pay for all this.
So how does it play in Congress? Because I remember during the campaign, some of the Democrat concerns that they brought up were the fact that the CBO scored some of his budget plans, and it was still going to add to the debt. And
right.
on top of that, he wants to replace the sequester cuts. But the Democrats aren't going to give up so easily because some of those same sequester cuts hit entitlements too.
Right, and like the tax cut for one thing, while we think that's a good thing that'll help stimulate the economy, you're still talking about a $4.5 trillion blow to revenues probably. So that's a big hole to make up right off the bat. And like I said, I don't know if you can make up for that just based on economic growth. And so now we see him laying out these proposals to plus up defense and cut a lot of these discretionary programs. Where again, we think that's a good thing, but that's not going to be enough really to cover all of these things he's talking about paying for. And like you just mentioned, he's going to get pushback from Democrats, but Republicans as well, because some of these are their pet programs, and appropriators are very reluctant to give up their power of the purse. And so while some of these are good ideas and things we'd like to see, there's still a long way to go before they actually get implemented. Yeah,
well, I mean, we all are sick of the fact that for the last 4 or 5 years, we funded the budget by crisis. Is that a good way of putting it? I mean,
right.
It was all these continuing resolutions.
Now. Yeah, you see continuing resolutions, omnibus bills, and ultimately, that's a very bad way to govern. You
Sure.
don't know what's in these bills. Congress doesn't have ample time to really review it, and so they stick a lot of things in there that maybe they should go away, and we really need to go through that process and really closely examine every bill on an individual basis and make tough decisions and say, is this a program that's worthy of continuing? Is this something that the federal government should be doing? And hopefully they'll get back to that. But, I'm not sure you or I have a lot of hope for that in the short term.
So when he looks at offsets, does that come out of discretionary spending? I mean, I know that when you look at the pie in Washington, discretionary spending's there's not a whole lot of
right. It's about
the budget.
A third of the budget, yeah.
Right.
So it's a very small pile, and we put out our own budget last year that cut almost $100 billion in 1 year off discretionary spending, but there's only so far you can go with that, and with entitlement spending, seemingly for now off the table, you're really limiting yourself. And I think I heard Congressman Price kind of on the lead-in. Secretary Price now on the lead-in to my segment, but he said the other day that Medicare is probably off the table still, and so until they kind of open up the possibilities and start looking at entitlement reform, I think it's very hard to find enough offsets to take care of all these new proposals that they're talking about.
Yeah. What about tax reform? What role do you think that plays in this? Does that run the risk of lowering the amount of money the government's taking in? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, I read a couple of different news sources that said that they brought in a record amount of revenue last year to the federal government.
Right. I think they were higher than ever last year, but certainly, if we're talking serious tax reform and cutting individual rates and corporate rates and some of the other forms of taxation, then that's certainly a concern. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the proposals I think last summer estimated that $4.5 trillion revenue loss, and so that it really puts you in a big hole. And until we see more specifics and what kind of growth they're predicting and all of that, it's really hard to wrap our heads around what's going on here. And unfortunately, it looks like until we've got Obamacare up first, and it's unclear how long that's going to take exactly. So it may be another month or two at least before we really get any more details on the tax plan and see what direction that's going to go in.
It makes me happy, get a little shiver down my leg, as Chris Matthews might say, when I hear Donald Trump criticize some of the amount of money that we send overseas instead of spending it here, and he's got these big plans for infrastructure and the wall and these other things. Ultimately, I still sense the same frustration that I've had for years as a conservative, that we vote for people to go to Washington and to spend our money wisely, but when they get there, they don't think about how they're going to save money. They think about how they're going to spend it. And what we really need to do right now is look at cutting the size of the federal budget. And even under Donald Trump, I'm not sure that's going to happen.
Right. And I completely agree with you. We really need to be looking at ways to limit the size of the federal government. And he's doing that in some ways, but at the same time, we're talking about expanding, the military, which, is good within reason, but expanding veterans care, which is also good within reason, but you have to do it responsibly, and infrastructure. And then hopefully on that, they'll really look towards ways to bring in the private sector so that, the federal government isn't financing all of these projects, and we really need to try to get buy-in from the private sector and work with them to pay for these things. And we don't need to limit ourselves on offsets. We really need to, right now, in the situation that we're in, leave all possibilities on the table and find good common sense ways that we can reform government and pay for these things.
Have they ever given a serious look at baseline budgeting recently?
There's been bills the past few years, but nothing has really gone that far. I don't think it's really gotten a whole lot of traction yet. And they talked about biennial budgeting. That's another thing that a lot of people are in favor of, but a lot of people are also against, and it just really hasn't gotten any traction so far, I would say.
That's just sad. I guess I don't know what the answer to it is. I mean, knowing going in that Trump's not really a fiscal conservative, I don't know what the hope is for us to kind of get this thing under control. It seems simple enough. None of us with our home budgets will be able to spend more than we bring in, but at Washington, it just seems to be accepted.
Yeah, and I guess the good news is that he is still, sort of a blank slate in some ways. So Mick Mulvaney and OMB, the OMB director, is certainly a deficit hawk and very fiscally conservative. So there's hope there that he can have lots of good influence on President Trump and the process moving forward. And we'll see what they have up their sleeves here in the next months, and hold them accountable based on that, I guess.
That's good.
But hopefully we'll see some progress, and we'll see some good things coming out of that.
Once we get some more specifics, Justin, we'll get you back on the air and we'll see what you think about it.
All right, sounds great.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Justin Bogie, who's a policy analyst in fiscal affairs for the Heritage Foundation. You can read more of his thoughts at heritage.org. Bogie, just like if you're playing golf, Bogie. You can look him up there on Heritage. All right, 314-969.